the reporter right? I got... So quickly, can I ask Jeran for the IoT group? Can I ask Alessandra for the community networks? Can I ask Bruna for, hello Bruna, for the IG group to come and join me on the stage, please? Please, please, come and sit next to me. Yeah, yeah. So if everybody's there with me, I'm missing one group, and that would be the community networks group. Community networks, please send your reporter to this stage. Alessandra should be the reporter of the community networks, is she? Alessandra. Jane will be the reporter, so come and join me, Jane, so that everybody sees you. So, thank you. I feel a sense of frustration, but that is good, right? I mean, everybody is hungry about continuing this conversation, and I would invite you to continue this discussion. But time being time, I need to wrap it up now, so I will start with whoever is ready. It's just the start of the conversation, but I really appreciate having your first thoughts. So who wanted to start? You want to start? So say who you are, which group you represent, and please share your bullets.
Hi everyone, my name is Bruna Santos. I'm from Brazil, and one of these year's ISOC IGF ambassadors. With civil society / academia, depending on the forum you see me at. So when it comes to the discussion on internet governance models, on the first questions, who do we think are the current leaders on the multi-stakeholder model? And who do we think will be the leaders of tomorrow? The group started out by saying that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all model, and we should also envision that some stakeholders do the discussion differently depending on the fora that they're discussing at. So we should take into consideration that sometimes civil society should have a different position here and maybe should be leading the same process in another forum. Also, we should take into consideration the need for a transparent, inclusive, and engageable process to everyone from the very beginning. Everybody interested in the multi-stakeholder model should be able to get a voice. A lot of people actually noted that we should get rid of the name model. We should find an approach that would be like more like collaborative, and people should be able not to be imposed to a situation, but to work with it and evolve from it. On the second question, which areas do you think people will benefit more from the multi-stakeholder model? People discussed also that in this model, every single person has a role to play, so it's important to grant participation from everyone and being horizontal. Also, in the same type of place, we should be able to hold other stakeholders accountable. And just to finish, threaten was the name. Again, not impose models on anyone, and think more of a collaborative approach.
Thank you very much, Bruna. Thanks a lot, and thank you, this group, for sharing those thoughts. Second group, Jaren, please make sure you're quick.
Okay, I will. With regard to, I'm representing the IoT Trust by Design group. And with regard to the first question, whether or not IoT is a real threat, we violently agreed that it is, and it might have some serious real-world consequences as the smart objects get smaller and closer to humans. It might be even more risky. And also, IoT itself is currently evolving, and it's up to us to how to shape up the future. With regard to raising awareness and shifting consumer device, most of the participants raised that developing awareness, although it's very useful, it wouldn't solve all the problems. And the focus should be on the developers of the smart devices. Some participants were reluctant to pay extra for secure devices. However, most of the participants agreed that certification mechanisms and trust marks would be efficient. With regard to the role of policymakers, everybody again agreed violently that policymakers should be engaged. However, the process should not be top-down, and relying solely on legislative processes would not be enough to keep up with the fast pace of technology. And an interesting concern was raised regarding maybe different approaches might be suitable when addressing the levels of countries with different development levels. So developing countries might be approached differently while trying to serve. Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm sorry, but you see that we will be pushed out of this room soon. Jane, please, your 2 bullets.
Okay, I'm going to try and go as quickly as possible. One, we need to realize that the CN is a business model, as uncomfortable as that might be, and assess local needs, identify your local champions from a bottom-up perspective, identifying incentives to collectively agree on your focus, collaborating with local organizations, and recognize community needs. This is a mashup synthesis. Also, you need to work with mentors and champions, whether it's the kids teaching the elderly or the elderly teaching kids, and take advantage of those that have made mistakes before you so that you can not make those same mistakes. And time out. The other financing sources from the team down here: Toolkit Business Model Manual, External Partners Key, Government, Taxes, potentially community networks might have to tax break, Foundation by Local Community Buy-in, Transparent Processes, Relevant Interesting Services. All right, so this is fabulous community network team. Thank you very much.
Oh, very quickly, thanks a lot. I guess you can clap yourself as you did. It's just the beginning of the conversation. We'll continue next year. Thanks a lot. Good luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is the ICANN Open Forum. If you are coming in for that, please take your seats. Thank you. Did you work out what time your session is tomorrow? So you can go shopping in the morning? Sure.
That's definitely not till the afternoon.
Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to start. Thank you very much. If you're not staying for the ICANN Open Forum, please leave the room. Good afternoon, everybody. Please take your seats. We're about to begin. Is it close enough? Yeah. It's very hard to hear because you can't.
Chris, how do you start this? My person, this button or
Top button.
this one?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ICANN, traditional ICANN IGF forum, looking ahead, challenges and opportunities. My name is Chris Despain. I'm a member of the ICANN board. We want this session to be interactive with some questions, and you never know, maybe even some answers. We're going to hear briefly from our chairman, Shireen Shalaby, from our CEO, Yaron Marby, and we're going to address one specific issue briefly, which is in respect to GDPR, but otherwise this is very much an open session, and the topics that the topics that we talk about really are in your hands entirely. Before we start, could I ask those of you in the room who are familiar with ICANN in the sense that you know what ICANN stands for, and if I say GNSO, you know what that means, could you raise your hands, please? So those of you, if you wouldn't mind, those of you who are less familiar, would you mind raising your hands for me, please? Excellent, thank you. So for those of you who may not be so familiar, we will do our best to use as little code as possible and try and speak clearly and use long words rather than acronyms. I'm going to start by asking our chairman, Shireen Shalaby, to say a few words, and so Shireen, over to you.
Oh, there you go. Welcome to the ICANN Open Forum et bienvenue à tout le monde. This is my first IGF as chairman of the board, and I'm very glad to be here with you today. I appreciate you taking time out to be with us. I know everyone is very busy, so thank you for coming here. For those of you not familiar with ICANN, you may wonder why we are hosting this forum. And the answer to this is really straightforward. Thematic issues are being discussed everywhere in Internet governance fora, and these have an impact on ICANN's mandate. For example, here at IGF, we have discussions around topics such as privacy, such as intellectual property, jurisdiction, cybersecurity, and many more. And if ICANN is not represented in those discussions, our points of view will not be considered as policies, legislations, and priorities are formed around the world. So that is why we are here in Geneva. IGF in particular is a very important venue for ICANN and has been for the past 12 years. We have been strong supporters of the IGF since its inception, and we have been active at all levels, national, regional, and global. We have been and continue to be active because the IGF is a unique platform for global dialogue on the development of the Internet and involving stakeholders from the wider Internet community. So if you are new to ICANN, you may think, great, I now understand why they are here. But then you might ask the question, but what do they actually do? The answer, again, is, in simple terms, we have a technical mandate. And to explain that technical mandate, to reach another person on the Internet, you have to type an address on your computer, a name or a number. That address has to be unique, so computers know where to find each other. ICANN coordinates these unique identifiers across the world. And without that coordination, we would not have one global Internet. If you are here today and you are not already involved in the ICANN community, I hope you will consider working with us and sharing your interest and experience. If you are already active as an ICANN community member, please take the time to welcome some of our newcomers here at the IGF. I see some familiar faces when I look around, and I also see some new faces. I hope, as Chris said, that you will all feel equally comfortable coming up to the microphone and asking any questions you may have. So let's have a good exchange of ideas this afternoon. Thank you. And now I want to hand over to my colleague and good friend, Joran Marby, the ICANN President and CEO.
Thank you, Shireen. And hello, everybody. Can I ask a question? How many here has attended an ICANN meeting? This is going to be a very interesting Q&A. We are talk about coordination. We are very good at coordination, ICANN, but we actually failed. I actually have the same speech as Shireen. So I would like to cover what we do. Now, actually, I have to invent something from here.
Sorry, that's the advantage of going first.
You're the boss. I mean, this is for me personally, IGF is a fantastic place to be because it's actually where a lot of discussions that people sometimes want to have at ICANN meetings. ICANN has a very peculiar and very important way of doing things which are very specific. We are, in other words than that Shireen said, we provide you with a user interface to the Internet. We are not the Internet. That means that many of those questions that actually relate to the Internet has to be taking place somewhere. And I think the IGF is the place to have them. The sessions I've been to and the sessions I intervened in has often been about words like regulation, about problems on the Internet, on all the bad things that is happening. To some extent, those things are a feature. Every day, 3.5 to 4 billion people is accessing this global Internet system. They do what they want with it. They share IDs, they share information, they buy things, they sell things, they do what actually they want. That interconnectivity is what actually makes Internet. It's important to have the discussion. It's important to have the discussion of what to improve. But never forget, it's a fantastic resource for mankind. and make sure that when we go into any discussion, so we don't make sure that we don't have the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Make sure that we don't do anything that can actually hurt the interconnectivity of internet. With that, I open for questions.
So, over to you. At this stage, anything anyone wants to ask? Otherwise, it's going to be a very quick session.
Please. This is the first time in world history.
There's a gentleman with his hand up over there who has broken the dam and agreed to ask a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, my name is Julius Endert from Deutsche Welle Academy in Germany. Maybe my question is a little bit naive, but I'm interested in who holds the real power in ICANN. Who is in power for decision making? Is it industry? Is it people like us, or politics, or who else?
I think this is definitely a question for the chairman to answer at this stage.
I'm going to take one for the team here. All right. Good question. Very good question. ICANN has a model of governance that is unique. It's called the multi-stakeholder model of governance that you have probably heard about in this IGF by many actors and participants. In this model of governance, clearly many stakeholders, whether they are government, businesses, civil societies, academics, all of them, come together to create policies. And then these policies, once they are developed and formed, are sent to the board for review and approval. So that's one way of making decisions in the ICANN. It is probably the most important way of making decisions. The other way we make decisions is that we get advice from our supporting organizations. So ICANN has various supporting organizations and various advisory committees. They send us advice, and they expect us to respond and act and take that advice seriously. That's another way of following and making decisions within the organization. Now, the transition from the US government stewardship took place about a year or so ago in October, 30th of September 2016. At that time, the bylaws were 50 pages long before the transition and became 250 pages long afterwards. And in the new bylaws, there are several new powers that the board now shares with the community, with the stakeholders. So really today there are no two sides. The board and the community are together, and its stakeholders working together in one direction. And sometimes we have difference of opinion, sometimes we disagree, but on the whole we have one objective, right? And going in one direction. And that is to make sure that we fulfill our mission. And our mission is a very technical mission, and really, in a simple word, is about the security and stability of the domain name system, right? And there are a lot of details below that. So there isn't really a power broker within ICANN. It doesn't exist. If the board makes decisions that are not consistent with what the community expects, the community has the power to remove individual board members or indeed the board as a whole. But the board, you should know, is also the community wants the board to lead. So it's not there just as a figure, but it's also we need to lead, but we need to do it in the right way, respecting this multi-stakeholder model. Have I answered your question? Thank you.
Yeah. One second. Thank you for that. I wonder if the answer would have been even slightly different if a year ago. Because someone in the audience might have said, well, what about, if you hadn't had the transition, then doesn't the USG have the ultimate power? But of course it doesn't exist anymore, so, sorry, the USG exists, of course, but the transition. Yes, sir, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, my name is Siva Subramaniam. I'm from the Internet Society India, Chennai, and I want to start my question by referring to a remark that the chair made related to the mission of the ICANN, that which is a little narrowly defined, but in looking ahead on challenges and opportunities, I noticed at the IGF that there are emerging technologies and quite a lot of discussions taking place about emerging technologies, especially in the area of identifiers.
In the regulation from the existing European Data Protection Directive? The answer is a small but very significant amount of change. For one thing, the ability to rely on implied consent for processing is quite curtailed. The ability to the scope of the sort of geographic scope of the law is quite enhanced. Currently, the directive applies to processing that takes place within the European Union. The GDPR applies to any processing undertaken by an entity that is established in the European Union, wherever that processing takes place. And for anyone engaged in providing products or services in Europe, any processing involving personal information about EU residents. Now, we are a global business, and most registries and registrars do business internationally. So that means all of the registries and registrars are involved. And registries, registrars, and ICANN do quite a lot of collection, retention, escrow, and publication of personal data related to domain name registrations. All of that is processing. All of that is covered by the GDPR. Some of it's quite obvious. Registrars need to collect that information in order to get your domain name registered, in order to bill you for those services and provide customer service. They need to pass information on to registries who need to collect it in order to provide the registry itself, in some cases to enforce registry-specific policies and to identify and mitigate cyber threats. And both registries and registrars currently have obligations to collect and process this data in order to comply with their ICANN contracts and to abide by certain consensus policies that are the product of the bottom-up multi-stakeholder development process at ICANN. Data protection authorities have been asking questions about the need for publication of all WHOIS data for about 15 years. This is not a new thing. I believe the first Article 29 Working Party statement on this came out in 2002. And they've recently made it abundantly clear that the sort of current public WHOIS can't be reconciled with the GDPR. So this is going to require some change, and given that the GDPR itself is principles-based as opposed to prescriptive, that's hard to do. The other day, Joran gave the best explanation of this that I've ever heard, and so I'm going to steal it from him. He suggested that when he was 16 and going out, his mother would tell him to behave, and he would duly promise to behave, and then he would go out and behave, only to learn that that wasn't exactly what she meant by behave. That's the conundrum that we have right now with respect to this principle-based, that really is a great description. I just love it. So the goal has to be to come into compliance with the GDPR while respecting existing consensus policy and the policy development process to the maximum extent possible. There are probably several ways to do that, but ideally we can keep it simple and as uniform as possible to respect consensus policy and the multi-stakeholder process. We should try to facilitate reasonably frictionless access to appropriate data for legitimate uses. Now, unless and until current policy is modified or replaced through the bottom-up policy development process, which is specifically designed to identify the global public interest, this is a compliance issue and a matter for the organization, not the board of directors. So I've just done this simple part, and now I'm going to turn it over to Joran for the hard part.
Thank you for stealing my only joke I can do about GDPR.
Sorry.
I mean, to take a step back, and is that the GDPR is really the first time a legislation so directly hits the policy-making process of ICANN. And it's even more interesting than that because it's also have an effect directly on ICANN.org. And I have to put some ifs in this because we are actually still working on the legal fine-tuning of this. But if ICANN.org is a data controller in any shape or form, then we also have to be compliant with the law as an organization. We have no process for that. It's like I ask the community to give me input about how to do my taxes. I mean, it is a law. We have to be compliant with the law. Anything we do, always, any contract or any policy we've taken, local law will always supersede this. And share with you something that maybe not everybody knows. We don't have a who is policy. There is one. There isn't one. Who is actually predates ICANN as an organization. And it had another purpose when it was created. So the process we're in, I'm admittedly saying that we're late in this process, as many others are. We started a process, the first thing we actually had to invent the process within the ICANN process to be able to look at this. So during the summer, we went out to the community and asked for what we call user cases. The reason for that and why we did that was because one of the things in this law is that you can't even store any data if you don't have a good reasoning for it. So that was the first step we did to make sure that we actually can explain why there is a who is system in the first place. We also share that information with the community, also with the DPAs. The next step we did was to hire an external law firm, really also to make sure that the community can ask questions, not only to us, also to other ones. So we hired a law firm in Europe, and we provided with questions to them, and we actually now in the second round now, just yesterday, published information, question from the community about the particular of the law. Becky said something very important. It is a law that is trying to change your behavior. So as my discussion with my mother, she apparently often didn't think I did behave when I was 16. I don't know why. But it is, we don't really know. But for us as ICANN, the ICANN.org, there are policies that put permissions into our contracts with our contracted parties of what kind of information they should submit into the WHOIS system. That is our benchmark. That is set by the community, and therefore it's our law. We can only go away from what the community have said as precisely as much as we think, so we're going to be compliant to the law. So there is a balance in there we're trying to find. So the next thing we did was go out and ask the community for proposed models how this could work out. And we're receiving those models and we're looking at it, and also together with our external law firm. In a very short period of time, we will come out with 3 different models. I always like 3 different models. That will be proposals for the community, so the community can comment on potential solutions to this problem. And after that, as Becky said, I have to make a decision. Because as the president and CEO of ICANN, I have to make the decision how my organization is going to be compliant with the law. We're going to use that because that's also, because we can't be asymmetric in this, that is also what we're going to have in relationship to our contracted parties, so that will be the demand on them. And I have to say that I'm internally grateful for the multi-stakeholder model and the engagement we're seeing from so many different parties from different sides of the aisles. The WHOIS system is used for many purposes. Bookkeeping purposes, to access for police forces, anti-spam, all of them are very legitimate reasons. And the way this has been, we started late, but the multi-stakeholder model in the ICANN community has been very receptive in taking the challenge of coming up with solutions. I will not go into the potential solutions because I have lawyers around me and there is something that can hit me in front of them. But the continuing dialogue has to continue until we set the stop date. We will be somewhere in the beginning, somewhere in January, we hope so. But this is, I want to point out, if you bring out GDPR in a little bit higher perspective, and that is that there are many areas around the world that is now talking about GDPR-like legislations. So this is the first time, but it's probably not the last time, where we're going to have the same conversations or have other effects on our policy making. And internally now in ICANN, to make sure that we actually don't miss the train before it leaves the station, we are now engaging with our communities around the world to get to know a little bit about proposals around the world, not only for GDPR, but other things. Because now when internet seems to be here and it's actually changing society, legislative people get involved in it for good reasons. They want to be able to protect their citizens. We have to find a better way of actually standing in the room and not taking sides in any policies. Many people ask me if I like GDPR or not. I have absolutely no opinion about it. It's the law and it's a legislation. But we probably should be better off standing in the room, and I need your help for that, to explain how internet actually works. Because it's a very simple box, but it has very strong parameters. And as I said many times, we don't want to, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we want to make sure that the legislators gets what they want without breaking the interconnectivity of internet. I stop there and open for questions.
Yes. Go ahead. Thank you.
It's working? Yeah. Thank you. Hi. It's Susan Payne here. I'm from the IPC, but my company also represents some registry operators, and we have a registrar business. I'm just interested in understanding your three proposed models and whether you're saying that those three models will be the only models acceptable, or whether if an individual or a group of companies want to come up with an alternative model that isn't one of the three that you propose to put out for public comment, whether those models will be an acceptable way forward, or are you coming up with a solution which is the only way forward?
I mean, this is what makes it so interesting. We're going to have one model. And the reasons we're going to have one model is because I have to be, and I'm putting myself as ICANN org CEO, that's how we are going to be compliant with the law. And because this is one of those things I don't think that we actually thought about before, is that if ICANN org is a joint data controller or co-data controller, it's actually we who have to be compliant. And it would be very strange if we actually then ask the contracted parties to have another compliance. With that said, again, if a local law, local DPA, theoretically will impose something that is sort of harder, local law always supersedes any decisions we make. Your question is also on the other side, is that this creates, of course, sort of misfit between the policies set by the community and the way we can enforce them in a large portion of the world, that's Europe. And therefore, we have suggested, and I know the community is looking into it, the community has to continue the discussion about the policies set for the WHOIS going forward, because I think it would be, personally I think it would be not a good thing if there is a difference in policies and the possibilities to enforce those policies. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Is ICANN late with its compliance efforts because it's counting on at least a temporary waiver for the GDPR?
We are not counting on any waivers for GDPR.
late is in the eye of the beholder. I happen to know, because of some other work that I'm doing, that one of the most well-known and largest organisations in the UK has only yesterday realised that it has an issue with GDPR and probably should do something about it. Go ahead, Johan. Yes.
This could, one of the other things we were looking into is not only the WHOIS system, it's also that we as ICANN, as a multinational organization, for instance, have many support systems for our community, anything from travel support and many other systems that we actually have data. And we are at the same time now looking into if they are going to be compliant with the law as well. Is there an interest? Why can we save it? And that's also something we have to make sure that we figure out before this next, the implementation of the law. And that can have a direct effects also. We hope not, but it can have a direct effects for us, for instance, coming up to a meeting. How do we organize participation in a meeting? Fellowship programs, and all of them. We of course trying to figure out the best middle way, but I'm thinking, I saw a T-shirt in our meeting in Abu Dhabi with a ninja on. I'm thinking have a T-shirt, it's the law. Thank you.
So in essence what you're saying, Aaron, is that there's ICANN as an organisation needs to be GDPR compliant, and then there's GDPR compliance in respect to WHOIS, yes, which is kind of separate from ICANN as an organisation. Other questions? Doesn't have to be about GDPR. Can be about some other acronym. Go ahead.
Is there a possibility that WHOIS could be separated from ICANN?
Anything can always be separated from anything. It's a part of the contract. What the community has decided should be a part of it. So, and it's a resource, and it won't solve any problem because the problems related to. I'm going to rephrase that, because then I'm sort of saying that the GDPR is a problem, and I don't make that statement. It's a law. We have to be compliant with the law, and we have to make sure that we balance what the community has decided when it comes to the WHOIS system. But it's something we have to deal with, like a taxation law or speed tickets or my mother's intentions.
Go ahead, Becky.
So the concept of separating WHOIS service from ICANN involves more processing of personal data. And ideally, you want to avoid processing that's not necessary. The other thing is that the nature of the data is it is data that registrars collect on their customers. And so just handing it out to third parties it is probably not likely to be acceptable to registrars.
It's worth also noting, just in passing, that there's an awful lot of work happening in ICANN in respect to WHOIS that has nothing to do with GDPR. There's a lot of work happening in respect to the protocol, whether RDAP, which is a new protocol for use for providing that sort of data, should be used. There is a GNSO, generic supporting organisation, policy development process looking at all things to do with registry services, including possibly completely changing the way that WHOIS operates. So all of that stuff is happening irrespective of GDPR, but GDPR feeds into it. And what shape what we now call WHOIS will take in 5 years' time is anyone's guess. The only thing we can say for sure is that it will abide by the laws that it needs to abide by. Joran.
And we are acting. The board recently took a decision to delay an implementation of a policy due to the fact that we have to figure out GDPR before we actually took that policy. So we are acting. But please engage with us when it comes to bringing the user cases. To provide us user cases why someone is using it is essential in this, or why the data should not be stored. I mean, when we talk about user cases, actually, we were when we asked for user cases, we didn't only go to one side of the house and ask them what to use it for. We also asked people to come in with why it's essential that information, for instance, are blocked for access to everybody. And that information is so important for us to be able to have the discussions with the DPAs going forward. And the DPAs are the ones who sets the standards for this. And so please continue to provide us with information until the final date. And why, I got a question, yes, why are we late? One of the reasons why we are actually delaying some things is that because some different parts of the communities has asked us to wait because they want to provide us with more information. And we are waiting for that information so we make sure that when we make a decision, it's going to be as good as possible, balancing as much as possible the different interests based on the policies we have. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Another question down at the end there.
Hello, Tom Mackenzie from Items International. On this question of GDPR, I've been working with registries, domain name registries and registrars in Europe, some of which, I mean, the ones that are most advanced on this issue of GDPR have spent the best part of the past year in making sure that their internal organization, their policies are all in conformity. And I think all of them would say that really it's necessary to have at least 6 months preparation time for this before GDPR comes into effect. In particular because, well, everything needs, there's a strong incentive to be compliant because the penalties for non-compliance are so high. Now, can you give some assurances to the registries and registrars that haven't yet started that process, that you are going to have some sort of recommendation in place or some sort of set of guidelines in place that gives them sufficient time to do the necessary work, and that'll necessarily be more than 2 or 3 months. And we are now 6 months away. How soon are you going to have completed this work?
So I'm going to take a shot at that. As a registry, I can tell you that it is up to individual registries and registrars to ensure that their internal processes and procedures are compliant, just like it's up to ICANN to determine that its internal policies and processes and procedures are compliant. So there's a lot of work going on with all of the contracted parties and within ICANN with respect to that. We're discussing a fairly discrete portion of the processing that takes place, which is the processing that is required by ICANN contracts and ICANN consensus policy. And so it's not as if we're starting from near zero. I don't believe ICANN is going to issue guidelines or instructions about how I handle my internal processes, and I would be fairly annoyed if they tried to do it. On the other hand, with respect to the relatively discrete requirements related to who is, related to data escrow, and related to some of the data retention requirements that are in contracts. That is what ICANN is going to come forward with a model based on input from the 3 models. And you may want to say more about that.
Becky's point is important because it's not, the enforcement of our contracts with our contracted parties is not a recommendation, it's the law. It's our law because it's set by the community, and I don't have, or the board doesn't have, the ability to go in and intervene in the policy-making process. So what we're talking about here is that ICANN.org has to be compliant, and that is a decision I have to make. But we also said that that is also because we can't have an asymmetry between that and what we enforce our contracts. So therefore, that model I'm choosing for my own compliance will be the one we enforce for the contracted parties. And therefore, I'm seeking input. I'm seeking input for I make that decision. It is a complicated thing which we never foresaw, and therefore we invented a process to be able to have community input to it. The more community input I get, the more coercion against one model, the better actually in our relationship with the DPAs, because it's actually part of the description in the law that you have to have good reasoning for storing data.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Yes, please go ahead.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Lucia from Mexico. And my question certainly isn't related with GDPR. However, I would like to ask, do you consider important that schools teach their students how the domain name system works? And if so, which would be the mechanisms to foster this capacity building amongst children and teens?
Thank you very much. Göran, you want to respond to that?
You should hear.
As a child yourself, you may.
Thank you, dear Vice Chair. I think one of the things that we often struggle with is that people don't understand how internet works, and they might sound boring. Actually, I'm a nerd, so I actually think it's quite interesting, because the inner functions of the current system, what we define as internet, is something that actually sets a limit or gives a possibility to interaction on the internet. So I think that it would be very beneficial. The same way I've been teaching my kids how to, when you cross the street, you look at left and right or left, whatever you are, to make sure there's no cars there, to make sure that we would provide the educational system with tools to understand how it works. I think that because it also gives the opportunity for people to ask the right questions. Are we doing it right? Should we change this? What are the limitations to the systems when it comes to security, privacy, innovation, and all of those things? Then the question is, would you pay for it? We don't have that in our mission, but we often participate also on a governmental space to create an awareness and to train governments about how to domain name system. And maybe we can also help the governments then to formulate that, to put that into the school system. I would think it's a very beneficial idea, and that's why they gave me the opportunity to answer it, because they know I like this very much. Thank you.
Becky?
So a lot of technology companies, and including domain name technology companies, are very involved in their communities supporting science, technology, and engineering and mathematics education. And Newstar is one of the companies that does that. And in connection with a digital literacy program that we sponsor in 3 states in the United States, students who graduate from the digital literacy program get a registration for a .us site that they can put up. I suspect that that is going on in a lot of countries. But if not, you should propose it in Mexico.
And I think the other point I would make is that the thing to remember, Lucia, is that if you learn about the DNS, you're also in essence learning about ICANN running the DNS the way that it does, and that teaches you then about the multi-stakeholder model and the multi-stakeholder model. And this is just one multi-stakeholder model, there are many, but the multi-stakeholder way of doing things and learning how to do that and learning how to be a part of that is incredibly beneficial going forwards, because not everybody actually understands how it works and what the basics of it are, and how important it can be to solve all sorts of other issues apart from this purely technical one of running the domain name system. Now, we have a remote online contribution.
So there is a question from the online WebEx session. How can ICANN predetermine that only 3 models would be considered by the community?
How have we determined that only 3 models will be considered by the community?
I mean, we have asked the community for giving us models, and which are the one we're going to well, the reason I'm saying 3 is because it seems like the proposals we're getting in from the community actually rotates around 3 different solutions. So that's why. And we're going to publish them, and we're going to ask community for input on them. So we constructed a system for having that input. But then we have to choose one, because it will be very hard to motivate to go to the DPAs and say that, hey, we think we're now complying with the laws, but we also have three alternatives to being compliant with the law. I think that would be a problem, and I say that as a former regulator.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Ayman Zarman. I'm from the University of Lyon 2, working on e-commerce terminology. I have a question regarding the GDPR and the information, personal information we give when we create a website. It's good that we are looking forward, but is there a way to look backward? Because when we register for a website, we give all this information, then it's stored on the database of the registrar. Then say 1 year later, we are no longer maintaining the website or the domain name, and we give it away. The information is still registered on the WHOIS, and some other websites retrieve this information, the personal information, the address, the phone number, the first name and last name, and list them on their website. I had a case where I bought a domain name, then I no longer used it. I started to search if my information is still on the web, and I went up to the 20th or the 30th page on Google. Then I found my personal information, the address and the phone number, listed on another database, which is not a WHOIS database, but a mere public database. Is there a way to enforce in the GDPR a way of cleaning the web from our personal information? Thank you.
I'm going to take a stab at it, but I'm going to say in advance this is not legal advice. So there are a million ways your name and address can persist on the internet for years. So the first thing I would say is I would not assume that you found it on Google because it's in the WHOIS database. Having said that, under GDPR, if you decide that you do not want to use a domain name that you've registered anymore, you have the right to unregister the name, and you have the right under certain conditions, and that when you turn in that registration, that creates an obligation under GDPR with respect to everybody's retention of it, because you can't retain data for longer than it is necessary to perform the service and provide related functions. So that kicks in the need for data minimization. If you, under certain circumstances, you might have an opportunity to ask the registrar and the registries and whoever it is who has the data to erase your data, break all connections with it. But I think as an initial matter, simply maintaining a registration, but not, not relinquishing it not letting it expire, and anything, as soon as your name expires, it should disappear from, well, not immediately upon expiration, but fairly soon after, it should disappear from the active WHOIS database. But so there are lots of ways that you can, lots of steps that you can take to get your information off the internet, but I don't think that if you simply maintain the registration without turning it in, you have grounds for getting it out of the WHOIS database, although it might not be available under GDPR, and it would certainly only be available for legitimate purposes.
Thank you, Becky. We're getting ready to wrap this up. We've got a supplementary question from the gentleman, I think it was a gentleman online previously.
Yes, it's a follow-up question, whether ICANN can share the 3 models now. ICANN alluded to these models in Abu Dhabi, but has given no specificity. it would be helpful for the community to know what ICANN is considering at this time instead of waiting until January.
You want to go ahead? You go ahead.
Yes. As I think I said earlier, we published some more information yesterday, which you find on our website. The reason why we are later than expected is because the community has asked for time to provide us with models. And that is what is happening. We are still waiting for some additional models to take into account, but we're getting closer. And we can't wait much longer. So we are going to produce those fairly soon. But I took the decision because I thought it was so important to give the opportunity for the community to interact with us. And I also hope when we produce those models, that the proposed models, that you take the opportunity to react on them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joran. Thank you very much indeed, Becky and Joran and Shireen, and thank you to all of the all the ICANN people who put all this together. Most of all, thank you all to you for giving up your time and coming to the ICANN forum, especially those of you who are perhaps not quite so immersed in the ICANN community as some of us are. It's always a pleasure to see new faces. Thank you all very much indeed.